from the BBC World Service in association with ABC and All India Radio. This is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell, this week in a very special place and a little unusual for Stumped. I'm in the centre court commentary box at Wimbledon, so calling tennis for the host broadcast this week, which is being beamed around the world. The setup's a little bit different to cricket, so I'm in a very low-ceilinged room, a door which you feel like you almost have to shrink to get through it, and then almost a pillar box, like a letterbox view out to centre court. Can't have any open windows in a tennis commentary box because we are so close to the action. I think if Roger Federer was to walk out of the locker room door just to my right-hand side, you feel like you could almost reach out and touch him. It's very intimate and very special. So swapping a bit of cricket for a bit of tennis this week.
It's Jim Maxwell for the ABC in Sydney. And Alison, you were heard all over Australia the other night when Jordan Thompson managed to win that 5-setter against Ruud, the Norwegian. So I don't know whether you knew you were actually on in Australia as the host broadcaster, but there you were, showing your versatility. It's all quiet in Australia other than the fact everyone's looking to get jabbed. We're up to 7.8 million jabs now. It's become a bit of an exercise as we try to wiggle our way out of lockdown and get back to normal. Hopefully that'll happen before the Ashes start. But at this stage, a few of us are hibernating at home.
Alison, if I were you, even if the room was half its current size, I'd be happy to be at Wimbledon, especially Federer's walking around, and I hope he is till late the second week. For All India Radio, I'm Charu Sharma. For today, speaking from the Echo Surf Hotel in Bentota on the southern tip of Sri Lanka. They've got a wonderful pool about 5 steps outside my room and a wonderful beach just 40 yards away. But I cannot access anything, can't step out of the room because I'm in hard quarantine waiting for the Indian white ball tour to Sri Lanka to start in a few days from now. Yeah, but, I'll take it. Good to be back in some cricketing action soon. Not just yet, though.
Yeah, let's hope you get out of quarantine very soon, Charu. Then stick with it. We're going to start this week by zooming across to Pakistan and the Pakistan Super League, because after an interruption due to COVID-19, the Multan Sultans are the champions. The Pakistan Cricket Board moved the last 20 games of the PSL to Abu Dhabi after COVID brought a halt to the tournament back in March. We have the Chief Executive of the Pakistan Cricket Board, Wasim Khan. Wasim, welcome to Stumped.
Thank you very much, Ali. Great to be here.
Now, you're not in Pakistan, are you? Because you, like Charu, are also in quarantine. Describe your whereabouts.
Yeah, I'm at the Sofitel at Heathrow Airport at the moment in day 9 of my 10 days, so not long to go.
Nearly at Freedom Day. Doesn't sound quite as glamorous as Charu's with a beach within touching distance. The Thames is somewhere in the distance, don't worry.
Yeah, exactly.
Just explain to us then, in what challenges did you face, first of all, Wasim, with having to switch the PSL to Abu Dhabi to make sure it was completed?
Yeah, look, I think with a lot of these things, when you switch, you're pretty much picking something up, a whole operation, and taking it to another country. So it was a major challenge for us because we found a lot of hurdles and a lot of obstacles getting in our way in terms of trying to get clearances from the Abu Dhabi government to hold the competition there. Pakistan was on the on the red list with Abu Dhabi. So we had to get special permission through their government to get the people in. And then we had production crews flying in from all over the world. Were coming from other red list countries, coming in on chartered flights. So there was a lot of things that kept going wrong up until the point that it actually happened. But we stayed pretty resilient, and thankfully we got it done in the end.
Yeah, and a successful tournament ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of youngsters sort of emerging, and like happens a lot of times with these sort of competitions, you get a team that kind of goes on a bit of a run. Multan had kind of stuttered quite a lot, but then they got to the Abu Dhabi leg and they kind of hit a bit of a rhythm, got into momentum, and then that just took them all the way forward. But they were outstanding throughout that whole leg.
Wasim, we know that the England men's team are due to visit Pakistan later this year. It'll be ahead of the T20 World Cup. It'll be their first tour since 2005. I travelled with them on that particular trip. But the England women's team are also touring Pakistan for the first time ever. I mean, in the past, the issue has always been, with security. Now you've got COVID to contend with as well. Can you see any issues or bumps in the road, or are both of those tours still very much on course to happen? And what specific preparations are already in place?
Yeah, look, Ali, I think there was a huge amount of learnings for us when we had to postpone the PSL back in March. we engage with a company called Restrata, who are pretty well known, who've worked on the Abu Dhabi T10, who work with England quite a lot, and also with the IPL when it was held in the UAE. So we've engaged them, and we'll have them involved in all our bilateral cricket moving forward as well.
So that's for security, is it?
No, that's more sort of on the bio side, right, the bio management. The security now, we've been incident free now for a number of years. And I think it's nice having conversations where people don't ask us about security, but ask us about the bio arrangements that we're going to have in place. So that's quite a different narrative and a good narrative for us to have. But we've got a big sort of 6-8 months coming up. We've got New Zealand, England, West Indies and Australia all coming in the space of about 6 or 8 months.
And just sort of following on from that, you've stated, I know, an intention to bid for ICC global events to bring them to Pakistan as well. Where are you sort of with that intention? And would that include women's events as well? Because that would be huge. I know there's some steps being taken with the recent awarding of women's contracts. They've advanced somewhat as well.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things for us, Ali, one of my goals was when I first came in was to really raise the level of credibility and the value of women's cricket in Pakistan, which hasn't always been there. So, the central contracts, we've also got a parental leave policy now in place for players who want to sort of start families, etc. But no, look, we're fully ready for what's ahead. We think that that women's cricket is moving in the right direction, and we're certainly going to be applying for women's World Cups. At the moment, the way the process is working with the ICC is because they're short on time. They're focusing on the men's events, and then over the next 18 months, you can also apply for the women's events. So we've applied for 6 events. We're going to be teaming up with a bit of a consortium from South Asia as well, with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka on a couple of World Cups. Also one with a couple with the UAE, and also the Champions Trophy, where there's 2 events that we are applying as a sole sort of deliverers, if you like.
So which 2 are the sole? The Champions Trophy?
Yeah, the 25 and 29, and the 27 and 31 World Cups, which are the 10 venue events. We're looking to partner with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka with those.
Yeah, well, that's in the future, but you've got your hands full right now. We're seeing so much cricket coming up and so much to do.
Yeah.
And I do hope that all the rest of the authorities are in sync with the PCB, because it's not just you. I know that many other authorities have to also push their weight in. However, let me switch to personnel, because once again, your preparations may just have been hit a bit because of Yunus Khan resigning as the batting coach. Now, it's tough enough getting things going, and now personnel changes as well. How have you taken that? And what's the remedy?
To be honest with you, the remedy that I've learned working in Pakistan is that there is a reactive measure that a lot of these things you can't preempt. There's always another sort of big thing around the corner, which you've always just got to react with and go with. So, it was a blow for us that Yunus decided to part ways in terms of where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do. But look, I think with most of these things, Charu, is that you deal with them as they come. We've been in this role now 2.5 years, and issues and challenges develop all the time, and you've just got to think on your feet and move on very quickly from that and find a solution. So, I think if that happened 2.5 years ago when I first started the job, it probably would have hit me like a thunderbolt. But having been a bit more of a veteran in this role now, I kind of take it with a bit more of my stride and then just deal with what we've got to deal with.
Whilst fans are allowed in bigger numbers, the players are still going to be under some tight restrictions themselves. A few of the Sri Lanka team obviously got sent back home for breaching I'm not allowed to say bio bubble, I can't remember what the phrase is, minimised risk environment. That might be what they're using for the tennis. Have you had to sort of remind the players of their responsibilities? What measures are in place to almost support them and try and ensure that bio bubble, whatever it might be, is secure?
Yeah, look, I think it's great when we work with ECB on this, because they provide all these games rooms, and they try and provide this sort of home away from home cinema rooms and all sorts of different things to try and help the players. And I think that, look, it's not easy. And you imagine these guys are going from one bubble to the other, and it is tough mentally. So we try and ease off as much as possible. We don't put as much pressure on the players if they don't want to tour, because they just can't even think about another bubble. Then there's certainly no pressure, and it's certainly not held against them. But all we can try and do is try and make the environment as comfortable as possible. They're currently training in Derby. They're staying on the ground there. They've got a hotel there. So within their quarantine, they're allowed to practice for a couple of hours, 3 hours a day, which allows them to get out into the fresh air and practice as well, which is really, really important.
I know you'll be looking forward to getting out of your hotel room, Wasim, but good luck for the tour. Good luck for the rest of quarantine. Thanks so much for joining us on Stump. Great to see you.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Wasim Khan, Chief Executive of the Pakistan Cricket Board, completing his quarantine, and almost sort of Jim and Charu, I think important for the bosses of cricket to know what it's like to go through this quarantine, because the players are having to do it months and months on end, and it does help if those at the top have a degree of empathy with what they're going through.
Well, if you're suggesting that just about everybody else in the cricket boards also ought to go through quarantine, yes, not such a bad idea, because I'm going through one, and I can tell you, it's one thing to talk about it, another to experience it. So, yeah, it would help for their empathy levels, but there is a little bit of sunshine at the end, or should we say a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, because it is what the players do. And I would be very surprised if a large number of players start opting out of these bio bubbles, because, they are, as Wasim just said, so pleased to actually get to the ground. And, there is movement. It's not just lock up inside the hotel room. So, yeah, a stiff price to pay, but luckily they are still plying their trade, which I think should be number one on their mind.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on All India Radio.
We now know, Jim, that the Men's T20 World Cup is also going to be staged in the UAE later this year. That's all because of the wave of coronavirus in India, where it was meant to be held. So it'll be played in October, November. It's just a few days after the IPL will finish also in the UAE. It's becoming a hotbed of cricket, isn't it? But was that really the only alternative? The right decision had to be taken now?
Well, just as a sidebar on that, the Australian T20 and one-day sides in the Caribbean preparing to play some matches there. And, of course, it's already become a probable point of controversy that with 7 players withdrawing from the team, either because they're bubbled out, when it comes to going back to the IPL, and they're not in the West Indies, how's that going to affect their opportunity to play in the tournament you're talking about? Next year we're going to have the T20 event in Australia. I would have thought that the way the protocols and restrictions are going in this country, that it would be very hard to bubble down all those players if they were to move here rather than be somewhere else. So no, I wouldn't have thought Cricket Australia would be countenancing Australia as an alternative venue for that tournament.
Well, Alison, that seemed to be the number one option to begin with, that Australia would trade places with India in terms of hosting the World Cup. And you may remember Dheeraj Malhotra, a good friend on Stumped, letting us know that the UAE was certainly a very serious consideration, 2 months ago?
Yes.
Or more, and that's how it's turned out to be. The UAE was the obvious answer, and good for them because they're getting a lot of cricket traffic. It's going to be a challenge to keep the pitches fresh because they do have limited grounds, just 3 of them where the IPL will be played. I do hope that with the T20 in mind, this is something for the IPL, that many more players who may have thought of missing out on the IPL might actually go back to their teams because they could use that extended feel of the UAE grounds during the IPL and then hopefully star for their countries during the T20 World Cup. But it was the obvious option with 3 grounds not so far from each other.
That's true, and all of a sudden those home boards, whilst it will stick in the craw, won't it, that players like various Australians haven't gone to the West Indies to represent their country right now. You can see home boards sort of not really minding, players going to the IPL because it will give that ideal preparation. However, for fans who want to see the best players represent their country as well, they might find it a little bit hard to accept that players have opted out of various England tours or Australia tours or whatever it might be. They've been rested from their country. It's an intriguing sort of dynamic. Intriguing also to realise we haven't had a T20 World Cup since 2016. They were coming thick and fast, weren't they, at one point? And now it's been, I know there's been COVID, but all the same, it's a long time since the name Carlos Brathwaite sort of entered the realms of cricket fandom when he smashed Ben Stokes for those 6s to win for the West Indies. So do you think very much like the appetite is there for a T20 World Cup now? For
Australia, there's a big appetite. And Aaron Finch has been making some noises about it today, as he's likely to be the captain when we get to that point, because it's the bit of silverware that Australia's never won.
Yeah.
So that's an incentive, apart from the fact you just want to do well in any tournament you take part in. So I think from the Australian perspective, the tournament on its own is significant and important for a number of the players. Of course, it's a lead in to the Ashes series next summer.
Well, from the Indian perspective, they would be quite desperate to get some silverware finally, Alison, after not winning the World Test Championships, which they may have been co-favourites to win. That didn't go down too well. And right now, of course, they would be pretty desperate to get the T20 title in India, perhaps because of the IPL. I mean, they started late, but haven't they taken to T20? And there are an enormous number of fans. I'm sure the media will play it up hugely. It's going to be a shame that it's not going to be held in India. So it'll take a bit of the sheen away. But I think there will be a lot of attention and therefore pressure on the players. And the T20 performances leading up to the World Cup are going to be very interesting because all teams want to get it absolutely right if you can get selection absolutely right. So there's going to be some challenges there as well in terms of getting the combination right. And ultimately, to get the trophy home, there's going to be plenty of pressure and attention.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that the last T20 World Cup was the women's one that was so famously filling out the MCG for the final, it just sort of whets the appetite, doesn't it, for a World Cup in T20 cricket in the men's, and we've been without one for so long. Jim, I haven't sort of looked at the calendar specifically. How long is it between the end of the T20 World Cup and the first Ashes test? I know that the test series has been pushed back a bit, hasn't it, into the early weeks of December. I mean, that's going to be a very quick turnaround. And once again, players having to switch very quickly from the shortest form to the longest form. And, this is proving one of the biggest challenges of modern day cricket.
Yes, I don't think the Ashes is an issue as much as that Afghanistan one-off test in Hobart, which starts on November the 27th. So there's a potential overlap there with quarantine and all sorts of other things floating around that run into the organisation of a test match. So you may well find that it's not the number one Australian test team, given the flow over of players out of that T20 tournament, assuming Australia gets to the end of the tournament. So, yeah, there's a potential clash there.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be the biggest challenge for Afghanistan, won't it? Because pretty much their test team will be the T20 team, and they'll be travelling to Australia, unfamiliar conditions, with very little preparation time. But that does seem to be the way of the world. And even here at Wimbledon, as I look out over centre court, because we've been seeing players slip on the grass here, again, adapting from clay to grass in a very condensed space of time. Cricket's not the only sport where the condensed nature of the calendar can cause a few troubles. Well, that's all we've got time for on Stumped here on All India Radio. You can keep in touch with us throughout the week on Twitter. We're at BBCWS Sports. Use the hashtag BBC Stumped. My thanks to Charu, Sharma, Jim, Maxwell, and of course to you all for listening. Stay safe, and I'll speak to you next week. Bye for now.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.